Hi, everyone. Welcome to our roundtable today, Synagogue Revenue Revamp. I'm just adding and admitting a few other folks who are entering. Great. Well, welcome, everybody. We are so excited for the roundtable today. We're excited to gather the Synagogue community for today's important discussion. Before we begin, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping items for today's session. So this roundtable will include attendee participation. So we encourage you to share your video and submit any questions via the chat box, or you can send a direct message to me. If you have any tech issues, you can feel free to send that as a direct message to me or to Katrina, who's also on the line. We will be recording today's session, and we'll share the recording and the slide deck itself in our follow-up email to everybody, so you can reference that in the future. Great. Well, today's speakers are Doug London and Brielle Steinberg from CCS and Marty Greenberg, who's joining us from BJBE. We're so excited for today's call. Doug, I'll pass it over to you to get us kicked off.
Thanks, Margaret, and welcome everyone. We're very excited to be with you today. My name is Doug London. I'm a Senior Vice President at CCS. I joined CCS in 2013 and have the privilege of leading our work in the Central United States based out of our Chicago office. A significant portion of my work is focused on partnering with our synagogue and Jewish-focused clients, and I also have the honor of serving as the executive sponsor for our Pride at CCS Employee Resource Group, and I also serve on our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group. I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Brielle Steinberg, a corporate vice president in CCS's New York office, who also joined the firm in 2013. She's focused much of her career at CCS on partnering with Jewish nonprofits, including the Birthright Israel Foundation, PJ Library, and several synagogues who are joining us on the roundtable today. And prior to CCS, Brielle worked as the artistic staff associate at the off-Broadway theater company Playwrights Horizons. And lastly, and most importantly, we're joined by our CCS friend and previous client, Marty Greenberg. Marty is currently the Chief Strategy Officer at Forward Focus Concierge Medicine. Prior to that, she served as a Major Gift Officer at JCC Chicago and as an Assistant Vice President and Assistant Dean for Development and Alumni Relations at IIT Kent College of Law. She is also a member of Congregation BJBE in Deerfield, Illinois, where she has held several lay leadership positions and currently serves as the Financial Development Chair of the board, where she has led their membership model revamp. Marty, thanks in advance for what will be a great conversation. A bit about CCS on the next slide. CCS was founded in 1947 and is a strategic fundraising consulting firm. We have 14 offices across the country and 3 internationally, and we are pleased to work with nonprofits across the world and across sectors and sizes. In addition, woven into our mission is a partnership with our organizations for transformational change is our commitment to foster broader change throughout our own community. As a firm comprised of highly talented, mission-driven individuals, we embrace our responsibility to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into the fabric of our firm's culture and in our mission. On the next slide, we have deep roots working with synagogues, large and small across the country, as well as with Jewish-focused social service and advocacy organizations. As I mentioned, many of you are here today, and to our new friends, welcome. Today, we're excited to be conveners of a conversation. We'll start with a quick overview and context setting of philanthropy and trends in the field before we drill into an innovative case study of BJBE, and then we'll be sure to leave ample time for conversation at the conclusion. And with that, I'll turn it to Brielle to get us started.
Great, thank you, Doug. So we're going to start just to get a sense of who's here with us today. We wanted to just do a quick poll of this group. So these 3 questions: what is your role at your synagogue? Approximately the percentage of your budget is membership and from philanthropy, and then how has your synagogue changed its revenue model in the past 5 years? So if you can take a look at the screen before you and fill that out quickly, we'll see what this group is comprised of. All right, fantastic. So almost 50% lay leadership. Very glad to have Marty with us leading that conversation. All right, next one. Very interesting. Okay, thank you. So the most, all right. And then last, but certainly not least, pertinent to our topic today, has your synagogue changed its revenue model in the past 5 years? And if there's another answer that we haven't put up here, please feel free to chime in. We really want you to use the chat and have this be a conversation as much as possible. Great. Okay. Excited to talk to those, the 88%, and learn a little more perhaps from the 12% who have. Great. Okay. Moving on to our topic of today. So we just wanted to start quickly setting some context for the conversation today. Anyone who's joined us for CCS's annual Giving USA presentations has probably seen a similar presentation in the past, but it's always helpful to review it and set the context when we're talking philanthropy. In 2019, we're still waiting on the 2020 figures, but in 2019, Americans gave very close to $450 billion, and there are many indications that we will be passing that mark in 2020. Always interesting and important to look at this breakdown. So 69% from individuals, and then 17% from foundations, half of which approximately are family foundations. And then of course, bequests coming from individuals. So we're really looking at 85 to 90% of giving coming from individuals in one form or another, which of course is particularly pertinent to our synagogue clients when we're talking about our fundraising coming from the individuals, certainly. Where are DAF contributions counted? That's a very, very good question. That is the gifts. It's a little tricky how they've figured out how to assess that, but I believe it is, if it's made to the DAF, it's in the foundation's portion. So that will continue to grow. Next slide. Again, we wanted to quickly highlight just 6 trends that we're seeing in philanthropy that really impact the field at large, whether we're talking about synagogue revenue models that combine dues and annual giving, or you're talking about a major capital campaign. We want to think about the following considerations. Continued philanthropic growth. We're seeing year-over-year growth in 2020. Again, signs point to growth there, and early 2021 indicators show that this trend is continuing. A competitive landscape. So when we are making the case to prioritize your synagogue in philanthropy, the options for philanthropic investments are growing. There's 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States, and the number keeps growing from there. Generational wealth transfer, a huge topic in philanthropy, and certainly plays into considerations for synagogues when we're thinking about multi-generational families or inherited wealth impacting our donors' capacity. The importance of major gifts. We're seeing philanthropy increase, but we're also seeing bigger gifts at the top of those pyramids and not necessarily more gifts at the bottom. So major gifts are and will continue to be important in campaigns and in annual giving, and we'll talk a little bit about when we're thinking about at least the revenue revamp that we're looking at today, the role that some major philanthropic contributions played in there. And then mid-level donors and donors as savvy investors. The last 2 are really about both nonprofits and donors professionalizing, being more intentional and thoughtful about building a pipeline of those major gifts. And also, someone already asked about DAF, so great question. We're seeing donor advised funds, the numbers skyrocketing, not just for necessarily high net worth individuals, but becoming proliferated across the United States, and family foundations formalizing as well. And then when we specifically think about Jewish and synagogue philanthropy, just some observations that we've seen at synagogues, and please weigh in if these resonate or don't resonate in your community, but a generational shift. So seeing that younger generations, not necessarily giving to Jewish causes, in the same way or in the same style as previous generations. We're seeing things like the Jewish Future Pledge as a clear example of how older generations want to address that concern moving forward. Concerns around disaffiliation. We're seeing in recent years giving to programs that build Jewish identity have superseded social service programs. My guess is that 2020 might buck that trend for obvious reasons, but that we'll see a return to that trajectory, that really being a significant concern and driving a lot of Jewish giving. Engagement versus investment, seeing younger families who may be more engaged, they have their kids in religious school, there's bar and bat mitzvahs coming up, or they're spending more time at the synagogue, but they don't necessarily have the philanthropic capacity or haven't reached their philanthropic prime in the way that older generations who might not be as engaged any longer do. So balancing those pieces. We love working with synagogues at CCS because regardless of sort of the size of the development team, there's natural cultivation that's taking place just very, very naturally through life cycle events. And so coming in, no matter sort of where you are, building a culture of philanthropy from that, there's a pretty natural trajectory. Community participation. So volunteer leadership and donors really concerned with the participation rate, wanting to include everyone, which is wonderful and something to certainly be considered when you're thinking about the revenue model, sort of how does that address the needs of a large and in many cases, diverse congregation. And last and certainly not least, and exemplified by Marty's role on the panel today, we see board and leadership at synagogues very heavily involved, maybe more hands-on than at other nonprofit organizations, though not necessarily built for capacity in the same way that you might find at the ballet or at some other institutions. So I hope that these resonate with this group and will certainly factor in as we jump into the revenue revamp portion of our conversation. Doug, take it away.
Thanks, Brielle. Before we move past this, just the philanthropic landscaping, kind of the foundation setting, any questions or reflections from the group before we dig in and have a discussion with Marty about BJBE's successful revamp? Great. Well, Marty, we're up. A bit about BJBE. BJBE is located in Deerfield, Illinois, and was established from the merging of two synagogues in 1964. With approximately 1,100 families, BJBE is a beautiful Reform congregation with dedicated leadership. BJBE is fortunate to have a clergy team of 4 led by Senior Rabbi Karen Kadar. 40% of members are under the age of 50, while another 36 are over the age of 70. In early 2019, BJBE retained CCS to explore a new model of membership to address the changing climate of synagogue life. And Marty, I wonder if you might just, to start us off, share a bit about what made BJBE make this decision and what were some of the key considerations that you took into account as you explored this option.
Okay, first of all, hi everybody. Nice to be here. Hi, Jan. Anyway, why did we decide to explore or pivot to a different model? I would say we found ourselves really pricing ourselves out of the market. We had costs that continued to grow, but we could not continue to raise our dues numbers. And we had congregants who had friends who said, we love what we see at BJBE. We would love to be there, but it is just not affordable. And we also found that while we had a consideration process, there were just so many people who just elected to not pursue that. It was humiliating, embarrassing, or they just really felt that they didn't want other people knowing their business. So we decided to explore an alternative model because pricing ourselves out of the market. And also we really wanted to be more inclusive. We wanted to cast a wider net and just really break down the barriers for people to come in the door and join. So that is why we chose to pivot. And, we found that besides what was happening at our synagogue and within the Jewish community, that culturally within our society, with the increased number of millennials, that the whole concept of joining, even in the non-Jewish sector, in the secular world, was diminished. Clubs or whatever else, this whole notion of joining was becoming less and less of interest to people. And so we needed to be more future thinking and more creative. I will say this, we had 3 big concerns about pivoting. One was if we move out of the traditional model, which we are so familiar with and comfortable with, will we be able to generate enough revenue to meet our financial needs? That was very scary for us, very, very scary for us. And so we pulled together a handful of congregants who were financial wizards, and they just ran financial model after financial model after financial model to really find a sweet spot where we thought we could successfully do this. So it was based on that. And even then it was a calculated risk, but we did have some data. I would say another big concern we had is we chose a self-directed model, and the concern was, will all that freedom where people can choose themselves, will it cause confusion, misunderstanding, insecurity? We were worried about that. And so what we did to counteract that, we created very specific guidelines for our members to follow without telling them how much they should give. They needed to just decide that themselves. But we also offered one-on-one coaching. So any household that still felt a little perplexed about what they should and should not do, we were willing to have private and confidential conversations with them to help them, sort through what they wanted to do. And a lot of people were concerned that members were going to game the system and go for the free ride. And as offensive as that sounds, there were a lot of people that were concerned about that. And so BJBE just decided to take a leap of faith and trust our members. We were not going to be police people. And also we felt there was research done. We spoke with several other congregations throughout the United States who had already pivoted to a self-directed model. And the evidence proved that in every case, there was not one synagogue where a majority of their congregants took advantage, looked for the free ride, gamed the system. So.
Thanks, Marty. I know that it was important to BJBE to consider the word member in this process. And you thought a lot about, the shared sacred partnership name, and the word member is really a passive word, and you were intentional with partners, allowing for congregants to encourage to feel more invested, more a part of the process as opposed to a more passive engagement. Can you speak a little bit just about that and the culture shift that it took for the congregation in making that decision? And then we'll jump to the next slide where you can dig into some of those objectives that we outlined.
Yes, Doug, thank you. That was a huge piece, because now you have to remember, nobody is telling the member what they should pay or what they should do. So we had to really think of creative ways to motivate people to give as much as they possibly could. And we realized that one thing is that the more ownership they felt and the more invested they felt in the outcome, the greater the likelihood that they would, dig deep and give as much as they possibly could. So we very specifically chose to eliminate the word member. Now, I will say this, just tactically, we still use the word member a lot in year one, because if we started just using the word partner, they wouldn't know what we were talking about. But like when we moved into year two, it was 90% the word partner and 10% the word member. And at some point we hope to eliminate the word member completely. But yes, we really needed to find ways to further get people to feel invested and ownership as a tool or tactic for them to want to give and give lots.
Thanks, Marty. Katrina, thanks for switching slides for us. Marty, when BJBE sought to undertake this process, I know there were a number of key objectives that changed the traditional membership model. Can you talk us through what some of those goals and objectives were and how you came to determine them as a congregation or as a leadership group of the congregation?
Yes. Okay. So if you look at this slide here, number one, a commitment to meeting members where they are. Again, it was one of these things we really wanted people to give what they could give. We created these guidelines that we said, okay, we want you to sit around your kitchen table, talk about BJBE, talk about your family, and determine by three things. One is, what is affordable for your family? What it would be a meaningful commitment for your family, a gift of the heart. And thirdly, what is needed to support BJBE and its financial needs, so that it really became a thoughtful process. And that's the way we meet the members where they are. And the line that I always use is, if it's good for you and your family, it's going to be good for BJBE. If it's not good for you and your family, it is not good for BJBE. And that's what we mean they are. Removing the financial barriers to membership. I spoke a little bit about that before. Again, a lot of people find the consideration process offensive. So we're saying, let's figure out how we can allow as many people in our door as possible where they can have an opportunity to live within a Jewish community. And the streamlined requests, I don't know about you guys, but it got to the point where we were doing so many fundraising projects throughout the year. I mean, if not one a month, one every other month, to keep really, really old for our members. So we decided that the Shared Sacred Partnership was going to be an all-in. We eliminated our annual fund campaign. We eliminated a lot of our other fundraising tactics. We kept a few, like our gala we kept, and a couple of small mission-driven things. But we wanted to streamline the requests because people were sick of being asked.
So Marty, to confirm what you just said, Shared Sacred Partnership was one ask of BJBE. There was no solicitation during Kol Nidre. There was no additional year-end solicitation. Your congregants were asked once for their entire gift for the duration of the year.
That is correct, with the exception of our gala, which we considered a mission-driven event. It built community. And then, we did like, fun project or a little, but no big asks of any kind. We gave, I forgot what it's called, where you give out the little bags of goodies, and I don't remember the name, sorry.
Oh, Shalach Manot basket.
Yeah, right.
There you go. Talk to us about the approach, Marty. I know that prior to CCS partnering with BJBE, you had already done a lot of the legwork in coming up with this plan, and then we helped you execute it. But talk through, the really intentional steps you took to get from concept to actual implementation with the congregation.
Okay, so I would say there are two boxes that could appear on here that I thought about later, so I'm going to just orally tell you about it. I would say to the left of research box, we started with a blue sky visioning group where we thought, what, we need to do something different. We don't know what it's going to look like. And we pulled a couple of key people together in a room, and we brainstormed what are all the different scenarios we could do for our membership revenue. So we started with a blue sky visioning group. Then we did extensive research. We had formed a research squad of about 4 people, and we read every book, looked up every study that was done on synagogue, different models, and we called people. We did interviews with people. It was quite elaborate. This was all volunteers did it. It was really fun. It was exciting. They were into it. And then the research squad, reported to the board. But then after the research, another box that I should have suggested on here that I did not, is we really, like I said earlier, we had a team of financial wizards. There were probably 4 of them, where we took, the visioning pieces and the research pieces, and we took our budget and we ran through a million different financial scenarios to figure out how to financially structure what we were doing. So there was this big financial analysis. Okay, once we did the visioning and the research and did our initial financial analysis, which by the way, we kept doing continually, that's when we reached out to CCS. We thought we cannot do this by ourselves. There's major messaging involved. There is major focus groups and webinars and roundtables, additional financial analysis. And we reached out to CCS at that point, and they were, like I said, we could never have done this without them. So then we moved into listening sessions or focus groups. We had several focus groups that we held. We then also, in the focus groups, were to solicit specific reaction to the idea. And it helped us frame and tweak how we were defining the new model. Once we landed on what the new model was going to be, we then had a huge series of roundtables and webinars to educate the congregation on what the new model is, and lots of question and answer sessions and things of that nature. And honestly, and then in addition to that, we also had outreach tables at Saturday morning services and outreach tables at Friday night services where people could come up and ask questions to educate and inform people. It was a massive, massive, massive communication effort. And we have about 1,100 households. We calculated that we probably had a touch point with at least 800 of those households through the focus groups, webinars, roundtables, and information tables. Because we were told that to make a serious shift like this, that in year 1, you had to really focus a lot of attention on your current members and bring them along thoroughly. And then with regard to volunteer ambassadors, we utilized volunteers in so many different ways. Specifically, they were the ones that they were at the tables giving out information. They were hosts at the webinars and the roundtables. They were facilitators at the listening sessions. And these were all lay leaders, CCS was behind the scenes coaching us and advising us, but our lay leaders were the ones that were out front in all of it. Let me see. Did I forget anything, Doug?
No, I think that's great. You touched on the financial modeling piece, which I think was important. And there's a couple questions in the chat just regarding, how did you come to the number, right? So I know, Marty, we went back and forth and had many conversations around what is the suggested amount that we encourage folks to give, the per household number. Do we share a recommended number? Do we not share a recommended number? What's important to note also is that there were higher level opportunities. There was a recognition level, the recommended amount, there were levels above that for which people could give, whether it's 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 to offset the folks that perhaps didn't reach that level. That was a part of the financial modeling piece. And we did work together, Marty, to assign some specific amounts for some of those people. Can you talk a little bit about that process and, both the flexibility of the financial model, but also the need to have that planned model to make sure that we had, key members that would be giving us our key high holiday gifts poised to give more in this effort, and some of the things that we planned for around that?
Okay, yes. Let me just tell you that this is probably the most complicated and challenging part of the whole process. The communication piece was hugely labor intensive, but it was not as complicated and tricky. The financial thing was, I got to tell you the truth, from the time we got approval in January to actually rolling it out in June, we probably changed our financial model a half a dozen times. So one thing I have to tell you is that we had to be nimble through the focus groups, through the roundtables, and even up to the minute before we actually sent our brochure out to be printed, we were making last minute changes in the financial presentation because we kept learning more every day, every time we talked to somebody else. So like we started with one version of it and then we tested it on some people and went, oh my God, they're going to give less than they gave last year. We're saying something wrong. We need to, okay, so there was that. I got a little sidetracked. Sorry, Doug. So I got to get back focused on what am I doing? Okay. Oh, yes. So, you know, first we were going to ask everybody a percent, and then we decided not to do that. And then we decided to give everybody a minimum amount. And then we decided to ask them of that. We decided not to do that. We kept moving all over the place. In the end, I think what we ended up doing was individualizing every single ask by asking for a percent of increase and what have you, where we actually would say, you did this and will you do that and blah, blah, blah. Okay, but Doug is right. One thing we have learned is that, and this is important in year one, but it's really critical in moving forward to sustain the program. It's really important to always try to find tools and techniques to elevate people's giving, because it'd be very easy for everyone to just kind of stay in the same place or go down or whatever. So yes, we chose to create these recognition levels, which were hugely helpful. We had no idea how helpful they were going to be. We didn't even know if people were going to pay attention to them. But it was amazing how many people, when it was a self-directed model, even though we gave a suggested percent of increase, they zeroed in on that lowest recognition level number. And that was that number, which was, you know, a good number. But then the other thing that was key was we did one-on-one leadership asking, because we knew we were going to have some folks who carry this for us, especially, I mean, you have to remember in year one, we had no idea if we were going to get no money at all, or a lot of money, or the whole thing was going to bomb. We had no idea, even though we did as much test runs as we possibly could with these financial studies. So we thought we better get out there and hustle some leadership asks. So we did, we probably did 12 leadership asks, I would say approximately, figuring we'd have a cushion if things kind of bottom out. So that was very helpful. And let me just say this, clearly this leadership group and leadership asking will always be a critical piece of this program moving forward.
Marty, I think in our questioning, we covered most of the information on the slide, which spoke the differences between pre-SSP and post-SSP. Anything you'd want to note before we can share some of the results and then open up for questions? Because I know the group is eager to ask some questions.
Yeah, let me just look to see what is there. Yes, self-directed, yes, no longer consideration, yeah, only additional requests, mission-driven, yeah. I think we pretty much covered all of that.
Great. So if we jump to the next slide, you know, some exciting results here that I'll just go through the numbers, and then Marty, if you want to opine a bit. 100% of members submitted a commitment form, which is really exciting inside of the, you know, in advance of the membership deadline that was set forth by BJBE. The revenue model via shared sacred partnership saw a 5% increase between 2019 and 2020. 67% of members increased or maintained their financial commitment, and that number is a little bit higher in year two, 70 in year two. And 96 net new members joined BJBE after year one. And so, you know, there was a question in the chat previously. Year one was July of 2019 when shared sacred partnership was implemented for the first year, and then year two was July of 2020 during COVID. Marty, what would you add just about, I know that BJBE has, you know, some key thoughts around goals for year 1, 2, 3, and 4, And I know you had given some thoughts to some pillars for success. Do you want to chat briefly about that, Marty?
Yes. So as I had indicated, in year one, we were coached that you have to be totally focused on bringing your current members along and not be so concerned about recruitment and marketing to new members coming in. So that is what we did in year one. And we were extremely excited and relieved and happy with the outcome in year one. Typically, in year two is when you push real hard on reaching out in recruitment of new members. So that was originally going to be our plan, to do a very detailed, aggressive, creative outreach method for new members while we maintain our current members. However, COVID hit. So it was, I don't need to tell all of you, you all know what that means. COVID is COVID, right? So we put the push for new member acquisition marketing on back burner and got really focused on survival mode. That our goal was to just, you know what, if we could maintain in year two what we accomplished in year one, we would consider it an enormous success because of COVID. And I'm very happy to report that we did hold our own. We did not drop significantly. I don't exactly remember what the exact numbers were, but we felt very good about it. We maintained. We did bring in about 25 new members, which we were elated and excited and woo, because we didn't think we'd get anybody during COVID. Like, why join if you can't come into the building and see anything and do anything? So yeah, so year one, I told you, year two, typically. Now, we're gonna plan now for year three. And in year three, we are gonna continue to do mostly a maintenance plan because COVID is not in our rearview mirror yet, okay? And in addition to that, our rabbi is retiring. And so we believe between COVID not in the rearview mirror yet and our senior rabbi retiring, people don't really want to join unless they know who your senior rabbi is going to be and what they're going to look like and all that kind of stuff. However, we are already starting to receive inquiries for our school. So we do think we might see a little bit of a bump because people, now that it's no longer all remote and the kids can come into the school, most likely comes the fall, we're going to see some increases with the school enrollment. But again, I would say mostly maintain in year three because of COVID and retiring rabbi. And then in year four, look out, man, we are going to do, we're going to do that year two push that we never had a chance to do to the external world. So I probably shouldn't be saying that to the local synagogues that are sitting out here in the windows, but we do intend to do a very aggressive hard push year four for new member acquisition, because then we'll have our new rabbi and COVID will be gone, hopefully, and we should be looking good.
Marty, before we open it up for questions, a couple of things I just want to note, from an outsider's perspective. I think, one of the reasons why this was so successful is there was strong leadership. You were at the helm. You had a partner in the executive director and a partner in your membership director. Rabbi was supportive. And so, strong tracking and monitoring and making sure that you were able to keep track of all of the members was really an important part of that. I think there was also an opportunity to engage new leaders throughout the process. So you were the chair for year one and passed it off to someone else for year two, while still very actively involved, as you all can tell from, just the way Marty's talking about, the long-term plan of this effort. But so thinking about, just clear and concise communication, making sure there's a strong foundation for operational success, developing new leaders and engaging new people along the way. Is there anything else that you would add just in terms of, what made this successful from a foundational perspective?
I would say those are definitely it. I will say this, that those pillars, I call them pillars, become more and more critical as you try to sustain the program. Because in year one, there's a lot of excitement and fervor, but to sustain, I'm just going to repeat what the 5 pillars are. One is engagement. There has got to be extensive engagement to continue to have people feel as partners and invested. If they're passive, they're not going to be as motivated. There has to be increased financial transparency. If they're a partner, they need to understand what's going on financially and have some kind of voice in what's going on there. I agree with what Doug said. You need to have continuity of leadership. For example, no volunteer is going to be as informed on this as I was, because I was the starter of it, but I have to make it my business to make sure that future volunteer leaders in this program understand the value of it and why we are doing it. And again, you have to have a good financial monitoring system, because it was very complex tracking every individual household and who's giving what and going up and down and all that good stuff. Yeah.
Marty, thank you so much for running through this with me. I'm grateful, and I know that everyone on the phone is grateful. And we'd like to take the remaining 15 or so minutes to dig into some of the questions that we've received, but also open it up to any ones that might be on people's minds. For the larger group, if we don't cover anything, please know that we will address your questions in a follow-up document, which will also include the deck that we're sharing after this today. So if we don't get to your question, please know that we will do follow-up, but we're grateful for all the questions. And Priel is going to guide us through some Q&A.
Great. And we'll get rid of the deck so we can all see each other. Great. Wow, thanks all for jumping in on the chat, and I tried to get them all done. A lot of interest in digging into the results. I'm going to quickly go back to the process with just a question of, did you look at business models outside of the synagogue world, or did you really focus on synagogues when you thought about revenue? You mentioned membership at gyms and other things. How did you?
I would say 99% synagogues, but we looked at other member-oriented organizations as well, but I would say 99% that was synagogues.
And timeline, a couple questions about timeline. How long did this take from seed of the idea till you launched it in July of 2019? And then I think that, oh, go ahead.
For us, it was 12 months. We started with that Blue Sky Commission in July, and we sent out our packets the following June. Now, I will say this, we did it and it went well, but it was insane. I mean, if I controlled the world and I had a choice, I probably would have liked an extra 6 months, because we were like moving at warp speed. It was like really crazy. And I just want to say one other thing. Doug was right. It was the executive director, the director of membership and communication, and then myself, who was the lay leader chair. We worked nonstop together on this.
And when did you, well, actually, first, I'm going to ask one more question, but I'm also sick of, just my voice. So I would love other people to jump in with questions. So if you want to use like one of the reactions in the lower right corner to give, like, for instance, a thumbs up or something, we will call on you. So so feel free I'll read through the questions, but if you want to ask your question in real time, please feel free. And then, so Marty, just timeline, how long was the congregational sessions, the listening sessions, the webinars, like the educational piece of this? When did you start that?
We'll call that the public phase, because the private phase was really July through December. In January, our board authorized us to move forward. So it was June through May that we did all the public stuff. And then in June, we had our annual meeting and then sent out the packets.
And Marty, I think, when we did those listening sessions and had all those conversations with more of the invitation only groups, that was spring, right? That was like late February, March, April, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, the focus groups were first, so that was February, March. And then the roundtables were like April, May.
Because then the materials were all mailed June 1.
Yeah, right after the annual meeting, right? Like June 9th or something.
Yeah, and then the deadline was beginning of August for everyone to return their shared sacred partnership materials.
I saw some thoughtful questions. I don't see any thumbs up yet, guys. So I saw some thoughtful questions about planned giving. Did you, did legacy gifts factor into that? Or are those separate conversations?
The legacy gifts were a complete and total separate conversation because this was strictly for our annual operating budget. And the legacy gifts are for our endowment fund.
I'm getting a note that you have to hit the raise hands button in order for me to see it. Basically, if you have a question, unmute yourself and jump in, and I will make sure that you are heard. Sorry about that.
I have a question about the endowment.
Perfect.
Thanks. What is your, thank you so much. What's your endowment size and what's your draw every year from the endowment to the operating budget? And had you had an endowment campaign before?
I do not know what the dollar amount is in our endowment fund, and I do not know what our draw is at this time. And no, we have never had an endowment campaign before. Now, we have been participants in the Create a Jewish Legacy program through the Federation in Illinois. And so we're slowly building that. But I'm not really have not been that involved.
Jillian, we have that info. We can grab it for you. We'll update you before we wrap up.
I don't see anyone else unmuted. Please, again, jump in. A lot of questions about sort of, and you touched on it a little bit, but new membership data, how did that compare to previous years in terms of net and number of people who did, we had some attrition. So how did that compare to pre-SSP?
We definitely, in the net new member, we significantly increased. In fact, that 96 number, I think, was our gross. I don't think it was our net. I think our net was like 50 something, but we significantly increased our net new member acquisition in year one because we had stalled. We were just flat or losing or having a net loss, a small net loss every year. In terms of the dollar amount, again, we increased. What other measurement are you thinking?
Anyone who? Lindsay, I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, I was just curious, for us typically in a normal year, COVID aside, it's typically, 100 new members every year. I was curious, is 96 roughly the amount of new members you get every year, or was it, markedly increased?
I think if I remember correctly, Marty, it was more than double the new members that were a part of this process.
That is correct. It more than doubled the number of net new members.
But at the same time, you're saying that your core focus was not on necessarily publicizing and marketing, but rather engaging your existing membership base to kind of acculturate this change. So what do you attribute that just the word of mouth that now there's a new membership model and double the new members come in? Like, how did that happen?
That is such a good question. And you are reminding me that I forgot to tell you something. While we did not go out and do a new member acquisition campaign, we did do a returning member effort because we knew a number of people who left because they could not afford to be a member at BJBE anymore. So we did target the returning member audience. So that was one thing that helped. The second thing was it really was word of mouth. What happened was our members got so fired up and excited that they could now go to their friends and family members who really loved what BJBE had to offer, but just could not afford to join. And call them and visit with them. They see them socially, and it just organically occurred because of that.
Got it. Thank you.
I think that ties into, someone asked, you mentioned like year 4, we're going to go hard. And obviously the COVID was not part of this plan. And, we're pivoting a little bit, but what does that look like for do you guys know what a real membership push will look like?
Well, let's put it this way. I have my idea of what that looks like because, you know, being a former community organizer, I mean, I believe in a very multifaceted, both, you know, digital, in-person, events, paper stuff. I mean, a very comprehensive target piece. So I don't know what they'll do, but if I were involved, it would be, you know, the whole enchilada. I would use every possible platform available, and very much so one-on-one and personal, and coffees and homes, and the whole enchilada.
Let's talk about leadership gifts, our CCS's favorite topic. What did recognition and stewardship look like for those? Sort of, what did you put in place? You mentioned the giving levels. What did that exactly look like in this process?
So we did have specific giving levels. And then once these people said yes, and they came in, we knew we had to pay attention to them. So we did actually organize a year-long stewardship program. So like, just to give it, you know, almost every month. So, you know, we did something at Hanukkah, you know, we sent out notes or cards. We had, at Passover, we sent out notes and cards. We made phone calls to wish them a happy holiday. We had a special private concert with appetizers for the group. So we had a very planned and thoughtful thing. At our gala, we had a private, so maybe 2 events, lots of note writing, some phone calling.
I love,
Marty,
the 12. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just think it's important, Marty, to also note that Rabbi Kadar and the president of the congregation were both actively involved in the initial thank you. When those leadership gifts came in, when those higher level gifts came in, they were very deliberate with their outreach that happened during that point. I think that's an important thing to note as well.
Yes, absolutely, definitely. In fact, this would never have happened without the support of our full clergy, and very specifically our senior rabbi, Rabbi Kadar. And it absolutely would not have happened without the, you know, the support of our president. And one thing that I really didn't mention is that, you know, it was always very important to BJBE to be forward thinking, future focused, cutting edge, and risk takers. You know, you need to have an entrepreneurial spirit to do this.
Thanks, Marty. Alan, I see a raised hand.
Yes, thank you. And Marty, thanks for sharing all this with me. My question is, what do you envision going forward as far as having to make asks or one-on-one meetings or what have you of each of the partner families? Be able to do that like with a letter? Will you envision your team go meet one-on-one with each of the going?
Well, what we'll do is we'll go through our list of names, and we'll determine who the top 12 people are. Like, for example, we'll first look at who's been a leadership donor and decide if we want to go back to them and ask them to give again at the same level or give again at an increased level. But then we'll also cast the net a little bit farther and say, okay, who is not currently a leadership donor, who we think could be or should be. And then what happens is we start with an email saying we'd like to have a conversation, you know, personal email, saying we'd like to have a conversation with you. And then I would call them and say, I'm following up to the email to, you know, I'd love to have a conversation with you. And then you try to do, you know, one-on-one. I met one-on-one in person with people. And I got to say, sometimes those were tricky to secure. And then at times, if we couldn't get leadership asking, which it's good if it really is great if your president is comfortable asking to have them do it. It's great if your senior rabbi has the time to do it, that they do it. In this case, you know, I ended up doing a lot of it, but I sometimes would say, Rabbi Kadar asked me to call you. You know, so I use the contact of the rabbi, or sometimes we had it where the rabbi sent a letter out and said, you know, Marty Greenberg will be contacting you. I'd appreciate if you'd make the time to speak with her. But we did the asking in person.
Thank you.
Allison Lewin, also hand raised.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Marty, and thank you to the CCS team for taking the time to put this program together this afternoon. Those of us who work in the synagogue world aren't new to this topic, coming up around this time pretty much every year. And one question that has not generally been well addressed, at least I think to a lot of people's satisfaction, is the question of the balance between increased costs due to membership increases and the marginal revenue coming in from new members under a voluntary giving program. And Marty, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how that balance has been for BJBE.
You mean like the disparity of need versus what you bring in, or?
Right. So for example, my congregation would not be able to bring in a net increase of 100 new households without changes to our staffing structure, which increases our costs.
Oh, gotcha. I know what you mean now. I know what you mean. That is a really good question. Again, we were so nervous about both failing and nobody coming. And then we were also worried about what if too many people come, right? Because then we have to hire more staff. That's your point, right?
Right.
Okay.
And did the revenue from people who maybe, were the new members giving at a similar level to existing members, or were they giving at potentially a lower level because they couldn't afford traditional dues? And did it offset the cost increase?
Okay, well, first of all, we called a lot of the other synagogues to find out, just how much of an influx and at what point did you really need to like add staff and all that kind of stuff. We were worried about that. And we had determined kind of what our magic number was, that we figured that we could, bring in as many, I mean, I don't remember the number, but we did figure it. We figured we could accommodate up to, let's say, 100 new member households without having to add staff. But anything over that could become problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that, we didn't get over the number. So it was not a concern in the end, but it was a risk and we weren't sure what to do about it if it had happened, but we were just going to kind of play it out. Then as far as, new members giving versus current members and whether they give less or more, I gotta be honest with you, it was all over the map. There's no question that of the new members that joined, some of them came in, more conservatively. Some of them came in below the threshold we would have liked, but that's okay because that's the point of the program, right? But there were other new members who exceeded the average cost to be a member. And so it sort of balanced itself out.
I think, Marty, the other thing I would just note, and Allison, thanks for the question, is BJB also really undertook a deep dive into their budget to show to the congregation that they were, they took this opportunity to not just introduce a new membership model, but to show the congregation that they were being fiscally responsible. And I think that was important too, right? To buy, there was transparency, you were getting buy-in from the congregation at the annual meeting. It all kind of coincided really nicely. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I would agree. Now, just so you know, this wasn't all rosy. I'm telling you, we had great outcome, but we had a lot of struggles along the way. I don't want to be, a lot of struggles, a lot of doubting Toms. This is never going to work. Some people who were like, almost saboteurs at some level and not being believers. And, and so we had, all kind, and we did have, we had those 10, 5 to 10 people who did try to game the thing, but that's 5 to 10 households out of 1,100. So, it's okay. So yeah, but I just want you to know, it wasn't all rosy. We had a lot of debates and discussions and disagreements about how it should work. And
thank you, Marty. Very cognizant of the fact that it is 3 o'clock. Anyone who has to jump, please do. Thank you guys for, I'm going to take 2 more minutes just to wrap us up, but thank you for this conversation. We are going to send the slides we walked through to this group. We will answer any questions that didn't get addressed, either in a document or reach out to you individually. And we're also going to send a survey, certainly for feedback on this. We'd love to hear it. And also digging into other topics if we wanted to convene this group or a similar group again, one of which I think could be continuing to talk about this, because I feel like there's another hour of discussion to be had. Glennis, do you want to share the last slide? We did put together just some final thoughts of sort of if your synagogue, things to think about as you just think about whether your congregation is ready for a revenue revamp, things to think about before you begin, again, getting together some of those financial wizards to really understand the options and impact. I think to Allison's point, what is the gain compared to the continued increasing costs, even without new staff. There's some questions actually about resourcing that we will definitely address in follow-up to all of you. Committed leadership, I think Marty is a good example that BJBE certainly had that. A culture of philanthropy and philanthropic champions, so people who, there's a question about a safety net, people that you know are going to step up and support this as you sort of step off the ledge into this territory. A clear articulation of why you're doing it. And ideally, not always the case, but a larger strategic plan that this fits within at your synagogue, so that it's not, again, that it ties in with the why, that it fits in within a larger plan. And then these 5 pieces critical to success that I stole from Marty when we were speaking earlier, preparing for this. Commitment to ongoing education, that this is not a 1-year and done thing. There will continue to be conversations and reminding people of the conversation you had with them last year. Transparency and communication. I think Doug touched on that nicely, that this was really an opportunity to be very, very transparent and thoughtful in the communication to the synagogue. Strong engagement operations to support all of this work. A pipeline of new leaders, huge opportunity to bring people in because it is a whole community effort. So it doesn't just have to be campaign leadership making the major significant gifts. It can be at all levels and really can be a great opportunity to bring people in. And then creative ways to inspire the congregation to get people excited and continue to support it and talk about this and support the congregation in the way that you need to make all of the numbers work. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think I was gonna say we can shut this again. Please feel free, we're going to send this out, and the last slide has my email address, Doug's email address, and perhaps most importantly, Marty generously offered her email address. So, don't abuse it, but she would be happy to talk to you or pass you on to people at the synagogue who can talk through some of these. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and really, really lovely to see so many faces.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Marty. Have a great afternoon.